Good morning, Trinity Baptist Church. Today I'd like to start with a personal story, and we'll end with a story from Jesus from Luke. I was talking to my friend the other day, it's funny, he and his dad are very similar. And my friend was saying, yeah, we're having a hard time taking any of these shutdown things seriously. I asked him eventually in our conversation what their parents are doing. If they're visiting their parents, can their kids see their grandparents? Assuming that because he and his dad are very similar, they're approaching it a similar way. He said, my dad he's following the protocols. He just doesn't care at all what we're doing here because his dad has worked with international aid and relief and Christian NGOs for the last, couple decades. And he said, my dad's thoughts are just, how are we going to help refugees? How are we going to help India? How are we going to help sub-Saharan Africa? I mean, here we can distance, we might distance. We're trying to invent a vaccine, and if we get it, we assume we can buy it. But what about these other places? How is this going to play out over the next few years for people who were already in very vulnerable positions? That was super humbling to me to think about. I've been reading this morning more about COVID-19 and refugee camps in particular, and I think it's something good for us to all read about. I was reading on the World Vision website. I was reading on a couple of news sites. I was reading this article that I think I'll share in the notes from Doctors Without Borders, just about what it looks like to go into these refugee camps, to think right now it's very hard to give anybody the distance or space they need. It's a very infectious place. People don't have much access to clean water. They share their source of water with lots of other families, share their toilets with lots of other families. And it's hard to get good information through a camp like this when there are language barriers, when there's a lack of education. And of course, in the long term, we're thinking, well, hopefully a vaccine will be invented. We haven't given a lot of thought yet to, okay, when the first 100,000 doses come out, or 100 million doses, or whatever it is, who will get them? And it's not really likely that people with no things and no place and no country are going to be first. And so I think it's good for us to think, well, what do we do with that information as Christians? The fact that this is bad for us, but worse for others. And a good story, perhaps, for us to keep in mind is the one Jesus tells in Luke chapter 10 to the lawyer who asked him a question. This is what Jesus says, or I should say, this is how Luke puts it. He says, and behold, a lawyer stood up to put Jesus to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, well, what's written in the law? How do you read it? And he answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, you've answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Now, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? He said, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, you go and do likewise. I don't know exactly what we should do right now from Renton, Washington, but I know we should keep the rest of the world in mind and try to follow Jesus, who says, go and do likewise. Be like this Good Samaritan who isn't asking, is this my person my neighbor, but is asking, how can I be a neighbor? Someone who loves their neighbor, just like Jesus directs us to.